And welcome, everyone. I'm John DeBenedictis, the Executive Director for the National Soccer Coaches Association of Canada. We're a volunteer organization. And with us today as a guest, we have the President of Canada Soccer, Nick Bontis. Also acting as our host will be Alf de Blasis, who's experienced soccer broadcaster for CPL and a number of other things, as well as our technical director, Tony LaFerrara, is going to be joining us. So, fellas, I'm going to have you guys take over. Nick, it's been great to see you. And we actually coached each other a little bit while your kids were, you might want to talk about your kids and how well they're doing now. That was, I think the boys were U11 when you and I were coached against each other, and your team was very good and you won. But we also have a bit of history through Scarborough, Missouri, where you played for a while. So I'll let Alf take over. Thanks, fellas. Thank you very much, John.
And welcome to everyone listening and viewing this really special webinar. And I'm really honored to be co-hosting it with Tony. It's not often that we have an opportunity to hear from the top official in Canadian soccer, but today we do have that opportunity. So Nick, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend an hour or so with the members of the NSCAC. We're going to cover a lot of ground, at least we'll try, with Nick, including the fact that he's going to be joining our Canadian national men's team at the World Cup in Qatar in less than a couple of weeks, and we'll get to that as we go along. And like most of these webinars, this is an interactive session, so we'll be taking questions from our viewers from time to time. So if you'd like to ask a question, just use the Q&A box, or if you want to leave a comment, simply type it in the chat box, and we'll try to get to that in the next 60 minutes or so. So Nick, I wanted to start from the very beginning and maybe chat about your background in the game. And John alluded to the fact that you have a background in Scarborough. And not long ago, you brought to my attention a very rare piece of video footage that forever links the two of us. I didn't know this footage still existed. But it does, and it shows you scoring 2 goals for Scarborough Maple Leaf in a Robbie Youth tournament final, while I described the highlights for a TV soccer show that I was doing at the time. And your team went on to win that final and the trophy, and that was one of many awards and titles that you'd go on to win in your playing career. So why don't we start there? Why don't you take us through your career, starting with your youth club soccer in Scarborough? What were some of your fondest memories and maybe notable achievements through those early years with Maple Leaf and Azzurri?
Thank you, Alf. I hope everybody can hear me fine. I'm calling you all from my office here at the business school at McMaster University. So I got my books behind me. It's a beautiful sunny day in Hamilton, Ontario. You might also see that I have a lot of scarves. Every time I go to a high-profile match, I always pick up a scarf. And what you can't see is all the scarves that are in front of me from all over the place. So if I'm in Italy or England or Japan or wherever, I like to collect them. Alf, it's a pleasure to be with you. We had a recent event together where we premiered a fantastic movie, which was awesome. So I'm glad to be with you. I'm going to embarrass you, Alf, because in the chat box, I've just placed the YouTube link of said video where Alf is much younger, sporting a wicked stash with way more hair, doing the play-by-play of the Robbie. So I grew up in Scarborough, as Alf mentioned, grew up playing for a club called Scarborough Maple Leaf. Had fantastic memories in youth soccer. Obviously, played in the Robbie, played in the Ontario Cup. You know, did the typical things that youth teams used to do back then. Traveled to the U.S. for tournaments. You know, everybody hops on a van with parents, and we go down to Virginia and Maryland and Florida. So wonderful memories. And then graduated from youth soccer and went on to university at Western in London. Played soccer at Western as well. In fact, another thing that a lot of people don't know about me is I was a track athlete as well. So I played varsity soccer at Western, but I was also on the varsity track team. I'm a long jumper.
And your boys are playing for Western now, aren't they?
Yeah, so it comes full circle, Tony. So I went to Western, and now both my sons, Charlie and Dino, enjoyed a great OUA season this year at Western as well. So spent about a decade in London, because I did a lot of degrees at Western, and then moved to Hamilton. So I'm at McMaster, been here 24 years, started here as a professor in 1998. I'm now chair of the strategy department here, and I'm proud to announce that McMaster is this year's OUA men's soccer champion as well. So soccer seems to be encircling me wherever I go.
Oh, that's terrific. I just wanted to maybe shout out to all the alumni of Scarborough Maple Leaf and Scarborough Zuri who would like to chat with Nick, and nice to have you along and come on in and ask a question or provide a comment if you like. But Nick, I wanted to maybe talk about your coaching career, because after you played and after the university experience in London and playing in that community, you phased into coaching in Hamilton, and I guess you progressed through your coaching certification and reached the USSF National B license. Congratulations on that achievement. What was the most rewarding aspect of coaching for you?
Yeah, you know what? It's a natural path that most soccer players, male and female, take in this country. You know, you have a career, you play, you try to play old timers as long as your body will let you, and you know you end up having a family and you want to give back as a volunteer. You know, so I had boys that were obviously kicking the soccer ball in the basement of my house from the time they could walk. The other thing, Alf, that's important is, you know, I was very lucky. I had fantastic coaches. So if you have fantastic coaches growing up, you tend to kind of pick and choose some of those behaviors, and you try to emulate those behaviors as a coach when you become one. So, you know, if someone did something to you as a coach you didn't like, you know, you put it in the back of the vault there, and you say, I'm not going to do that to a kid if I become a coach, right? I'm going to do the opposite. So I was fortunate with Scarborough Maple Leaf. I had a fantastic coach by the name of Montague Henson. So Monty Henson, a Guyanese fella, was an amazing coach. He was like a father figure, you know, and this is the most important thing that we all who are coaches on this Zoom call appreciate, that sometimes we do play the father role or the mother role for many, many kids. So, you know, he did that for me. I remember being young. I was a striker back then. I would have nightmares and dreams of Monty yelling my name, Nick. So, you know, you see the impact that coaches have psychologically. Even in my university days, Ron Clayton, Rock Basacco, two fantastic coaches. I played semi-pro in the old CNSL, Alf, for London City, for a guy that was synonymous with soccer in London by the name of Harry Gauss. And then obviously decided to go do my licenses, was fortunate enough to coach for Hamilton Sparta, a local club here in Hamilton. My boys soon graduated way beyond anything I could give them. So they went on to, you know, much better things. And that's another important role that I think we as coaches need to also play, is to understand, you know, there's a certain capacity and competency that we can provide children at a certain level. And it's actually a good thing when a kid graduates beyond what your competency is, and to be able to pass that baton to, you know, a more formal academy or a professional academy if they're lucky enough. So really enjoyed my coaching career, because it really aligned with my teaching career, right? I mean, I've been teaching for 30 plus years, and coaches are very much like teachers, as we know. And even in the modern day game, and I'm sure we're going to get to this when we talk about Herdman, coaches are also psychologists, and this is you know, the biggest strength that John Herdman brings to the table. So we play a very, very important role, and I have a very, very strong affinity for the coaching community here in Canada.
Nick, my first club that I ever coached was the Maple Leafs, the Scarborough Maple Leafs.
That's right.
And I also coached for London City. I coached the team it was 100 years ago, and Harry Goss was the president. And also, if you remember, we had Harry at CFMT one time. Do you remember?
Yep, I do remember. In fact, I have a lot of memories of London City. Playing at the German Canadian Club was a beautiful club in a valley, beautiful old wooden stands. Lots of fans would come out for those games. And Tony, you're going to remember this, and maybe Alf does as well, but there was one season in the CNSL when I played with London City where Maradona himself, Diego Maradona, used to watch our games because his brother, Lalo Maradona, was playing in the CNSL. So we were blessed by royalty for that one season.
Yeah. Good old days.
The good old days, yeah.
But these days are pretty good as well, aren't they?
Well, they are, but you know what I
National
remember,
team,
Tony, is, growing up, in London and Scarborough, there was a lot of ethnic clubs
Yeah.
that really rallied around their communities. When I played for Scarborough, Azzurri, obviously, it's Italian in name only. We had Greeks and Portuguese and Serbians and Croats, but in Windsor, they would have the Windsor Croatians, in London, the London Serbians, the Hamilton Serbians here. So
yeah.
Canada is very much a mosaic and an immigrant country. And we brought that passion of football and that generation from our ethnic roots. And now if you fast forward, 30, 40 years later, Tony, we see that in the next couple of weeks, some of those immigrants didn't make it to the World Cup, of course, and Canada did. So
Okay, rub it in.
Well, I'm Greek myself, and the Greeks, what have we done since 2004, right, Tony?
Yeah, well, 2004 was a great year, that's for sure. Yeah. Alf, are you still with us, or are you gone? Oh, we lost Alf.
We lost Alf, so maybe we'll wait for him to come back in. But I do want to mention that I think it's important that we appreciate that. The other thing that's really happened that is quite significant, I think, Tony, in our generation versus the previous generations is the involvement with female and girls soccer in general. The growth has been astronomical. In many, many clubs all over Canada, we have way more girls registered to play our sport than we have boys. I have a sister. That's why I'm mentioning it, because my sister, Patty, she's a year younger than me. She grew up like me in Scarborough playing soccer, but for the first maybe 5 or 6 years, Tony, when she grew up playing soccer, she always had to play on a boys team. There was no girls soccer, even in a hotbed of soccer like Scarborough back then. And then some clubs started to develop. Scarborough Maple Leaf and Azzurri started having their own girls teams. A really, really famous girls-only club was called Scarborough United that you might remember back then. Rams United, of course.
This is Alfred. Sorry,
World.
I just missed your call. I'm on a Zoom call at the moment. But
I can hear you, Alf.
We're
We
saying
can hear you, Alf. We know where you are. All right. Nick, I think while we're waiting for Alf, I have a question that I'm sure Alf wants to ask you.
But if I can just
Johnny,
throw in
do you
a,
want to ask that question?
yeah, just there's a Q&A here from Tommy Kuzmanis. He says, yeah,
Tommy
Maple Leafs.
Kuzmanis.
Did you play with Scarborough Maple Leafs, Nick? And he says he was a former Maple Leafs player in 73.
Yeah, of course. So, and of course, I know Tommy very well. And I know Tommy's still involved with a lot of the local clubs in Toronto. I'm actually born in 1969, so I'm a little bit older than you, Tommy. So here's a funny story, and I'm saying this tongue in cheek, and I hope that nobody on this call gets offended. But, our team was called the Maple Leaf 69ers, believe it or not. And, we were too young to even know what the connotation of that word was. So forgive me, I apologize ahead of time, but we were born in 1969. So, that was the team that I played for, Scarborough Maple Leaf, 1969.
All right, Johnny, do you want to start the questioning, or while we wait for Alf, or?
No, go ahead, Tony.
Okay. Nick, the questions that, Alf sent me a bunch of questions that he wanted to ask you. I think the first one is, the most significant issue since you took over as president of the Canadian Soccer Association, have been the negotiations with the men's national team over the distribution of the bonus money from FIFA and for qualifying for the World Cup. With a few weeks to go, and Canada stepping onto the field to face Belgium in the opening match, where do things stand right now?
Sure. Very
Are the boys
important question.
happy, Nick? Are the boys happy?
Yeah, so it's a very important question. And I think, first of all, I'd like to point out that even though I was elected president in November of, I think it was 2020, initially I have to say that the biggest shock as president was not necessarily the negotiations, Tony. It was actually surviving COVID.
Right.
COVID was very problematic, as many people know. A lot of youth registrants did not play. We did not have youth soccer. We did not have, the MLS was canceled. The CPL was canceled. We had to, create an island games just for the CPL to occur for a month. Same thing happened on the MLS side. So I have to say, coming in as president, there was some dark times in soccer. Obviously, we knew we were going to get past COVID, and we eventually did. And one of the biggest positive experiences for me was that the Olympics were postponed for a year because of COVID. And sure enough, Bev Priestman, who was appointed our coach, our women's team, took them to a gold medal. So I wanted to make sure to acknowledge that it hasn't been all doom and gloom. Our women brought back a gold medal for the first time in 100 years of Olympic history. And it's a fantastic achievement. We're very, very proud of our women's national team. On the men's side, of course, John took them through qualification. And as you know, they had to participate in the repechage, right? No one even knew what a repechage was back then, but it meant that we had to go all the way down to the bottom to compete against all 41 CONCACAF, even the lower level ranked teams. And we did that over a course of a year and a half, 2 years, making it to the octagon. And of course, the story everybody knows is finishing top of the table with the octagon going into the World Cup. Now, the women always had a collective bargaining agreement, which expired in December of this past year. So I met with the women in January, the key leaders of the women's national team, including their legal counsel, and the senior women players would include the players that, Christine Sinclair and Quinn and Janine Becky and Sophie Schmidt, a few others. And I told them that we would start the process of renegotiating the collective bargaining agreement, but that something very, very different was going to come to the table. So this was around January 28, if I'm mistaken, January 28, 2022, where I told them on a Zoom call that I guaranteed as president that I would deliver pay equity. This was a very, very important and fundamental policy that I wanted to enact. As many of you know, we haven't had pay equity. Forget about soccer, forget about sports, forget about business. There are industries in Canada who still don't have pay equity, even though it's been legislated. And I knew this was happening in the U.S. because I'm very close to Cindy Cohn, who's the president of U.S. Soccer. She had mentioned to me that they had been negotiating for a very, very long time. There's no other country around the world that had a collective bargaining agreement that ensured pay equity. And on May 18th, 2022, a judge in the U.S. approved the new agreement where the U.S. men's national team and the U.S. women's national team would pool their World Cup prize money together and get paid dollar for dollar the exact same amount of money. So that's a very, very important precedent. And of course, in Canada, because our men's and women's agreements hadn't been renewed yet, we knew that we were next. And I have been negotiating on behalf of Canada Soccer with that in mind, that that we would deliver pay equity on the women's and the men's side. Now, this is a difficult concept to adhere to, as you can imagine, because, historically, traditionally, the men, not just our men, most men's national teams have negotiated a percentage of the pool of funds that would go directly to them. So, and that percentage, depending on which FIFA nation you are, typically ranges between about 20 and 30% of the World Cup prize money. But in the case of the men, they wanted a significantly higher value than that, which of course I, as a fan, first and foremost, believe they deserve. They've done something for the first time in 36 years. I remember exactly where I was in 1986, the last time we were in the World Cup. Yeah. But I knew that we had to do it under the context of pay equity. So anything that was above 50% would have been untenable. And that's why I used the word untenable back in June, because it also meant that we would have to pay the women dollar for dollar that same amount. And you can't pay more than 100% of the money that's available. So the negotiations have been going on. I would also like to point out that negotiations for the U.S. soccer, for the men's and the women's team to come up with this new collective bargaining agreement took 6 years. 6 years. I absolutely do not want this to last for 6 years. We want to get this done as soon as possible, but we need to also appreciate that the women had a collective bargaining agreement prior to that. We've been negotiating in good faith, and we're literally 95% of the way there with the women. The men only hired a lawyer and created and registered a players association in late August. So, they notified us by about early September. To be completely honest, we've only been doing it for about 6 or 7 weeks with the men. So we compare 7 weeks of experience of negotiating with the men with legal counsel versus 6 years of what it took in the US. I really, really still do anticipate and hope that we can get something done prior to kicking a ball in Doha. But if we don't, that's okay as well, because everything, of course, is retroactive. Anything that we negotiate will always go, into the pockets of the men and the women. Nothing will be removed. And frankly, on the women's side, regardless of what we negotiate with the men, the compensation piece is going to be higher than they've received in the past. And the other two elements of the deal, of course, are friends and family. The men and the women want guaranteed friends and family funds so they can fly out and have their family stay in accommodations. And we've provided that a very, very nice amount of money for friends and family. And even though we haven't signed a deal yet, that friends and family has already been implemented because their relatives have been able to book hotels and flights for the last month anyway. So there's some elements of the deal that have already been implemented, even though we haven't signed it officially, like friends and family. And of course, the final piece, of course, is naming, image, and licensing rights. And you recall that news came out a couple of weeks back that we signed a deal, an agreement with Alfonso Davies. The reason why we did that first is because Alfonso sells the predominant percentage of jerseys, for example, between the men and the women, and whatever agreement we've agreed to with Alfonso's organization is the exact same agreement that we're going to be offering to the men's and the women's.
So Nick, so from what I understand, on the women's side, everything is good?
Well, I'm not going to say everything is good in terms of a signed deal. And the reason for that, Tony, is because the men's deal and the women's deal are contingent on each other because they're going to get the same amount of money dollar for dollar. So that's why it's a little bit more complicated. Normally, when you have a collective agreement, there's two parties. If you think of what's happening in Ontario right now, you got Ford with the Ontario government, and you have the educational assistants. There's two parties negotiating with each other, right? Ours is a little bit complicated because it's Canada Soccer. It's the men's side and the women's side. The men's and the women's side have to be identical, right? So there's a certain amount of communication that also has to occur between the men's and the women's. But, I want to tell you that the negotiations have been cordial. Now, look, I don't sit in the negotiations on a day-to-day basis. This is what lawyers do for a living. So our legal counsel and the legal counsel of the men's team and the legal counsel of the women's team are the ones over the last few weeks that have been trying to fine tune all the numbers and the variables. But I can just tell you from a spirit and from a strategy perspective, because really that's my role as president, the spirit is that I want to absolutely reward the men for doing something that they haven't done in 36 years. That's very, very important. So whatever dollar amount we end up giving the men, I want to make sure that's in the top quartile of FIFA prize money, if I can use that term. And I want to reward the women with pay equity because it's the legislative responsible thing for us to do. And, when we finally get this deal done, we're going to proudly stand together, men, women, and Canada Soccer, knowing that we've signed an epic historical deal for pay equity that I think will send reverberations throughout not only the sporting world, but the business world as well.
Well, Nick, it's important that, the boys are happy right now because they're the first ones to play. The women will play next year. Are they happy, you think? Yeah,
so I'm in constant communication, obviously, with John. But what John has done is basically said, listen, your job is to focus on playing on the field. And that's what I want for them as well. They should not be worried about, compensation. That's what the lawyers do. That's why it was very important for the men to register a players association, which they did in August. The women had always had a players association because they're professionals. That's what they do for a living. They negotiate on behalf of the players. The players should only be focusing on one thing, and that is preparation for performance on the field. And in my conversations with John and the coaching staff, they are in Bahrain. They are getting ready for the game against Bahrain, which will be, of course, on Friday, then setting themselves up for that final tune-up match against Japan in Dubai next week. The roster will have been released by then. And then, of course, we're ready for Belgium, Croatia, and Morocco moving forward.
Alf, if you don't mind, I have another question for Nick, and then you take over if it's okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, Nick, both teams, both men and women, they have had tremendous success at the world stage. And, the programs have grown and evolved over the years. It's amazing right now, right? But the general feeling is that while the programs have grown and the teams have been successful, that Canada Soccer has not been able to keep up with the success and the growth of both teams. So my question is what have you learned? What has Canada Soccer learned from this experience? And how can you make sure that we do a better, when I say we, I don't mean you, but everyone here, we do a better job at the next World Cup?
Yeah. So that's a great question, Tony. And you don't know this about me, but I'm a strategy professor, and my PhD is in organizational learning. That's my expertise. So I believe in the spirit above, and he put me in this spot for a reason, and that's to learn. And you're 100% right. We are a small federation. In fact, I would argue that we are a tiny federation. We are just over $20 million organization a year, competing against federations like the US and Mexico and Germany that are $300, $400, $500 million a year, more than 10 times, 15, 20 times larger than us. So when you said, yeah, the men did something we haven't done in 36 years, 100%, it was a significant meteoric rise, attributable to many, many things, a golden generation of players, the psychology of John Herdman. And I would also like to add a significant investment in youth academies by the MLS clubs, primarily, Toronto FC, Montreal, and Vancouver. And, we got to go back to 2007. That's when that investment first started, at least on the Toronto FC side. So these things don't turn around in 24 hours. They take 15 years or more. So you got to take a long-term strategic approach. So my job now is to help our organization increase capacity. That's the most important thing, because we cannot stay as a $20 million organization anymore. We have to come up with new revenue streams. We have to build new human capital. We have to build new programs. We have a gift, and that gift is a guarantee that we will be in 2 World Cups in a row. That's a gift. Not many federations can say that. Obviously, I'm talking about the men's side. The women, of course, will be participating in 23 next year. And I think it's very, very important to understand that when we do that, when we build capacity, we add new people. When you get new budgets, you add new revenue streams, you build new people. So we actually have a posting right now for a chief operating officer at Canada Soccer that will help manage some of our capacity. We also need a chief commercial officer. That'll be the next posting that will come up at Canada Soccer. So there's a lot of activity internally that the public may not be aware of. Why? Because we have to catch up, Tony. We have to catch up to the performance that the women have been giving, let's be honest, for over 10 years now. But now we have to catch up on the men's side. And you know what? People argue, well, why did it take so long for the women, let's say, to earn the so-called respect? And it's a fundamental problem that's happening at FIFA. FIFA is also changing slowly. One of the things that people talk about is the prize money. You were talking about prize money. You got to understand that the prize money on the men's side is orders of magnitude more significant than the prize money on the women's side. So historically, in most federations, if men were getting 25% of the prize money on the men's side, women would get 25% of the prize money on the women's side. Well, let's be honest, the percentages are the same. But if that's not fair, that's not pay equity. That's not dollar for dollar. Well, in the short term, we as Canada Soccer have to make up that delta. And that's what we've promised to do, is to make up that delta. I hope that Canada Soccer doesn't have to continue making up that delta for the next 100 years of our history. I hope FIFA, in the next iteration, specifically when it pertains to 2026, will also realize that as they balance out that prize money, they will lessen the strain on the federations to do so as well. So that's another thing that I foresee in my role. Obviously, you're aware that I volunteer for Canada Soccer, but I'm also on CONCACAF Council as well. So those are the recommendations that we make as part of CONCACAF Council to FIFA, is to make sure that we want to rationalize and reconcile those budgets. I think that's very, very, very important. So the answer to your question, the long-winded answer to your question, is 100% organizational learning. There are staff that have been working their butts off 24/7, on the ground, many of them in Doha, many of them working tirelessly. Why? Because they see the opportunity as well. They see that we are in a golden generation right now of amazing women players and amazing men players, and the organization has to increase its capacity. And I've said this before, there's no point in being world-class on the field if you're not world-class off the field. So it's the responsibility of the board, and as chair of the board, my responsibility is to provide us with the resources so the staff can also increase their competency moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest, some mistakes have been made, and I'm sure you're learning from this, and everyone else around the world, the World Cup teams is learning from it, and hopefully, the next World Cup, we're not going to have these issues anymore, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm never going to promise that we're never going to have issues. Issues always pop up. That's what I've learned in this position. I got to be honest with you. I've been part of Canada Soccer on the board for, I think it's over 10 years now. For 9 years, things were pretty smooth. I got to be honest with you. But in this last 12 months, obviously, things have blown up. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing because...
Right. yeah, things got worse after.
Nick, if we take a step away from the players' perspective and maybe move back to coaching, we've been pretty fortunate in Canada to have had a head coach in John Herdman who's guided both the women and the men's programs to great success. There's been a lot of speculation lately that John may be enticed by a lucrative club position, perhaps in his native England or elsewhere after the World Cup. What is Canada Soccer's strategy in terms of retention, not only of John, but your other head coaches in the program as well, and in particular, maybe Bev Priestman and her staff on the women's side?
So let me start with Bev because she was the first one to win. So let's talk about Bev. It was very, very important, of course, for us to make sure that Bev was satisfied with a long-term agreement. So from a retention perspective, that was our strategy. That's what the board believed in as well. So, and something that Bev wanted personally as well. She wanted to be able to say, hey, I know that I'm going to be in Canada for X number of years moving forward. So we've done that with Bev, and we continue to have dialogue to make sure that she's satisfied, that she stayed. We're very happy, obviously, with Bev's performance. Who wouldn't be? You know, she brought home a gold medal for our women, and she's taking that program to new heights. I think it's also very important to note, Alf, that these individuals, both Bev and John, they're not just head coaches. In some federations, a head coach is a head coach. That's all they do is take care of the national team. But in Bev's case and in John's case, they have the responsibility for the pyramid underneath as well. We are not a small country, Alf, as you know, 7,000 kilometers from one coast to the other, multiple federations, multiple provincial associations, that sometimes do things their own way. The MLS, the CPL, we're a very, very complex organization, even though, as I said earlier, we may be only $20 million in revenue, which is relatively small. We're very complex, and that's also Bev's responsibility. On John's side, yeah, and this is part of the negotiation as well. So, and these are the things that happen behind the scenes. So as you can imagine, as you're negotiating with the players want a certain percentage of the World Cup prize money. We're going to give that exact same percentage to the women. And if there's a fraction left over for the association, guess what we're going to use that fraction for, right? It's going to be for friends and family. It's going to be for other expenditures to make sure that they have everything they need to be successful in Doha this year and in Australia, New Zealand next year. But it's also for the retention of staff, right? There's a large contingent of staff. This is coaching technical staff, 15 to 20 individuals that travel with this team when they go to these long-term tournaments. These individuals also need to be compensated, and these individuals also need to be rewarded and incented for performance as well. And that includes John. So that type of conversation and negotiation, Alf, I just want to assure you, has been going on for months, because we know that John's a very, very hot commodity. We want to keep him here 100% right through 22 and right through 26. So that's the timeline as a board that we have agreed to for both John and Bev.
Tony, do you have a question regarding coaching as well?
No, not really. I just wanted to make a comment about John Herdman. I got to be honest. When he was first announced as the coach of the men's team, we were talking about all the coaches, because we know everything, right? All the coaches, we know everything. We don't think he's going to do well. He's going to fail. To be honest, I probably was one of them as well. But I tell you, the guy is amazing. I mean, what he has done with this team, with this program, what he has done for soccer in Canada on the men's side and the women's side, it's just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable.
You know what? Thank you, Tony, for that.
Nobody else. Yeah. Nobody else. You talk about the Mourinho, the Guardiolas, and all of these guys, and they make millions and billions and trillions. But what this man has done, it's just amazing. Just amazing. And I hope that, I don't have a lot of money, Nick, but if you need $50, I'll contribute to keeping John here. We'll get everybody to put in some money to keep him here.
So let me
amazing.
Thank you, Tony, for that. And let me say a couple things, because people think being a president is all about glory and the show. Let me tell you, man, this is a very, very tough volunteer job. It is probably the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. When we go back to the previous coach that we had, and there was discussions about migrating John from the women over to the men. I mean, that whole decision was wrought with danger, as you can imagine. Dangerous because how would the women react knowing that John was leaving them? Dangerous because how would the men react now getting a coach that supposedly had not coached men before? So there was a lot of difficulty with that decision. But I can tell you, at least from my perspective, I had spent a significant amount of time with John traveling when he was the head coach of the women's team, going back, prior to the Olympics in England, the first Olympics that we got a bronze medal at. And the one thing that I knew about John was that he was a people person. He was a psychologist, first and foremost. And sometimes you need to over-invest in the psychology part of the game as a national team coach. And the reason for that is because the national team coach is very different than a regular club coach. Club coach sees its players every day. National team coach sees his players, 5 days at a time, maybe 6 times a year on average. It's an entirely different methodology for coaching. You don't have a very, very long time to develop relationships. You got to be very quick. You got to be in and out, and you got to generate respect among the head coaches of clubs. So the one thing that I'm going to tell you guys that a lot of people don't know, yes, everybody knows John is a psychologist and a motivator, and he's dynamic, and the players love him. But what you guys don't know is some of the highest profile club coaches in the world also love John. That's what you guys don't know. Because the one thing that John has done with his staff, and that includes, all the staff that are on his team, is he has really, really professionalized and taken the whole level of analytics to a whole new upper echelon. So every single time a player, whether it's Tejan or Jonathan or Fonzie or Osorio, any player comes to a national team environment, after that national team environment, whether it's a camp, whether it's a game or a window, the head coach and the technical staff also get a report from John. What they did, how much energy did they expend, what's the danger of recovery, what are some of the things they can work on. And there are coaches who've contacted me directly who've said, Lord have mercy, the reports we get from John when our players go to national team assignments is better than anything we've seen from any other national coach around the world. And that's a piece of feedback I wanted to share with all of you on this coaching Zoom call, because that's not public knowledge.
Yeah, and let's keep him, Nick. Let's keep him.
Do our best, trust me. And you know what, Tony? Look, I'm the first one to tell you that I think John would be absolutely instrumental and pivotal to our success, obviously not only for 22, but moving forward for 26. It's also because of the pyramid underneath, the way he's been able to integrate with the technical staff at, BC Soccer, Quebec Soccer, Ontario Soccer. That's very important. The way he's been able to integrate with the MLS coaches and the MLS technical staff and with the CPL as well. These are all critical things that John has done. We need that moving forward, but I'm a realist and I'm a pragmatist. I cannot guarantee anybody on this call that John is going to stay with this organization, right? There's certain realities that are out there, certain career aspirations that people have, certain financial implications that we have and limitations. And whatever happens, obviously, we as Canadians should be able to thank for what he's done for the amount of time that he's been with us in this country. And whether he stays or not, we'll move forward.
Yeah, he's not done yet, so.
No, he's not. He's contracted out till 2026. So that's the good news. And I'm going to say one last thing about John. Forget about the coaching. Yeah. Forget about the personality. Forget about the achievements on the field, all that stuff. He's a good person. And that's something that a lot of people don't know because they don't get a chance to spend as much one-on-one time with him as I've had the luxury or the players have had. I was at a youth tournament with John. This is going back many, many, many years ago. And we were sitting there in a cafe in Mexico, actually, in Toluca, and with our wives. So my wife getting to know his wife, I'm getting to know him. And right in the middle of us having a cappuccino, there was a bloody tornado in the middle of our outdoor cafe in Toluca. And we heard the rumbling of the tornado. We heard the rumbling of the wind. And literally 10 seconds later, everything, dishes, bottles, umbrellas, chairs flying through the air. I grabbed my wife, John grabbed his wife, and we sprinted in to be protected. But I'll never, ever forget that moment because that is exactly the moment that the relationship between John and Canada Soccer changed. And it solidified that he was going to be a tornado to come in and elevate the sport in this country. So a little bit of a side story, a personal anecdote.
Terrific. Terrific story. Nick, you mentioned pyramid, and obviously a very integral and essential part of that pyramid is the Canadian Premier League. I'm sure you know, I don't know if some of our viewers know that I've been a play-by-play commentator on CPL games for the past 2 seasons. And I can say that it has been an absolute privilege of mine to have called some memorable games and witnessed some outstanding individual moments over the course of the past 2 seasons. And just 10 days ago, we saw a record-setting attendance mark in Ottawa at a thrilling CPL championship final. And next year, we'll be welcoming a new expansion franchise that'll be based in Greater Vancouver. What has stood out to you about the growth of the CPL and its ability to provide not only our domestic players, but also foreign players with a showcase for their talent?
One word, Alf: resiliency. And that's a very, very important word for us to embrace. And I'll tell you why. You know, I played in the old CNSL. We had the old NSL. We had the whole CSL. We had the whole CPSL. I mean, add every acronym to every professional startup that we created that we then lost, right? I mean, it's a hodgepodge of starts and stops over the decades. But guess what? We started this 4 years ago, and you know, some owners came around a table with you know, the sanctioning of Canada Soccer, and you know what, Alf? They survived 2 years of COVID. Do you know how impossible, and I'm going to use the word impossible, how impossible it is for a brand new league to start year 1, and then in year 2, year 3, go through a period where you're not even allowed to play or bring people or sell tickets, and then you come back better than ever in year 4. I was at that game, Atletico Ottawa versus Forge 10 days ago. My Lord, what an amazing experience that was for the fans, for the quality of play. Forge themselves have now created a dynasty that they are now promoting worldwide, at minimum throughout the CONCACAF region. The excitement of Vancouver FC coming to the table. So that's what I've learned. I've learned that this league has resiliency, and that's what I'm most proud of, because the people around the table are very, very committed. Now, Alf, we got to talk brass tacks at the end of the day. It is about dollars, okay? They have deeper pockets than we ever had in those previous generations of the CNSL, the CSL, the CPL, the CPSL. Okay, those were deep pockets, but these are deep, deep pockets. And that's what you need to survive in the professional sports landscape in this country. It's not easy. And exactly the same thing is what I want on the women's side as well. I don't want to venture into a women's professional league without knowing that it's got the foundation to have the resiliency that the CPL has also showed us in the last couple of years. So make no mistake, I am the #1 biggest fan and supporter for women's professional soccer in this country. As a strategy guy, I wrote it in our strategic plan at Canada Soccer. So when it's in the strat plan, that's how you're committed to it. But we got to do it in a smart way. We can't start it and then fail and stop, Alf. Because if we do fail with a women's professional league, it's going to be extremely difficult to ever find all the perfect timing and all the ingredients, right? Our women's Olympic champion, Bev Priestman as coach, the laser focus of 2026 on our country. All these are great variables that we need to combine together to make sure that that women's professional league survives.
Yeah, I'm talking about that, Nick. Christine Sinclair, just a few weeks ago, I think it was, or it was a while ago, she said that the fact that we don't have a professional league is quite, frankly, embarrassing. I fear for the future of our women's team. And if we don't have a league because our players get passed by and overlooked, it's scary.
Yeah.
So,
and I agree 100% with Christine. It's embarrassing. I mean, here we are about to go to a World Cup on the men's side. We have our women who are Olympic gold medal champions. If you look at the top, I think it's 8, 9, or 10 ranked FIFA nations on the women's side. All, if not all, have domestic leagues. But let me also point out, Tony, that if you take England as an example, or Italy, or Germany, any of the large European superpowers, you know, they have sporting clubs that are worth billions of dollars. You know, you look at Juve and Inter and Everton and Chelsea and Manchester United and Dortmund and Bayern. You know, so within the umbrella of a Bayern You know, you've got not just the men's team, the first team, which brings in all the revenue, but you have the reserve team and the U21s and 18s and 17s and 16s and 15s, and you have now the development on the women's side. The challenge for us is we can't just have Toronto FC in its infancy, because I'm going to be honest with you, Toronto FC is still an infant. It's only, 15 years old. It's a baby compared to some of these clubs that we've been talking about on the other side of the pond, right? To also now say, hey, we want you to fund everything underneath you, including the reserve team, the 19s, the 17s, and the 15s. But then also you need to start it on the women's side as well. Yes, Toronto FC and Montreal and Vancouver, I believe, will do that, but it's not enough. That's 3. You can't have a league with just 3 clubs. We need to get the CPL involved as well. We need to get League One in Ontario involved, and PLSQ in Quebec involved, and the BC League One equivalent in BC as well. And also maybe community clubs. This is going to have to be a Canadian solution for a Canadian situation. Maybe very, very large clubs in Ontario. And I'm talking about, the Vaughan Azuris of Ontario or the Oakvilles of Ontario. Maybe they also have aspirations to look a little bit higher in their pyramid to also offer financing for a women's professional club. So the answer to your question is this is going to be a very, very unique model. I believe it's not going to be a model that we've seen before in the US or in Europe, because we don't have the multi-billion-dollar infrastructure that a first team has to be able to fund all these other assets. But, I'm very confident that we will have women's professional soccer in the next couple of years in this country. I'm very, very confident. We hired an individual several months ago at Canada Soccer, Bria Carr-Harris from Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, and her job is to spearhead the proposal for how women's professional soccer will launch in this country. And, I'm anticipating her presenting her report to the board of directors probably within the next couple of months. So the timing is right. And I agree with Christine 100%. But I think it's also important for everybody to understand Canada Soccer does not run soccer clubs. Canada Soccer does not run leagues. We don't do that, right? We sanction leagues and we sanction and accredit clubs, right? It's the deep-pocketed investor that actually is the one that will bring women's professional soccer into this country in partnership with a broadcaster, because we're going to need a broadcaster to also devote so we can get, the eyeballs out there in concert with sponsorship. But I can tell you, if those pieces are in place, Canada Soccer will be the first to sanction that professional league right away.
If I can just throw something in, fellas, we got a letter from one of our members, and in fact, this is Sam Cousy out of Ottawa, who, Sam used to, he ran our first convention online before, Zoom and things like that through the old, I think, Bell phone instead of internet. And he also was editor of our newsletters way back. So Sam has asked a question about girls soccer. I think you've already answered some of them about a professional league, but he seems to be a little bit concerned of what's happening. Our U20s didn't do very well. Our U17s, he said, was embarrassing when they played in India. And what his question is, we need to ramp up the intensity of our training and skill development competition. But first, is there a problem? He wants to know if Soccer Canada realizes there might be a problem there. And that's his rant for now.
No, that's fine. And that's fair. And we're trying to be as transparent and honest. One of the responsibilities of a board, a volunteer board and a volunteer president is to optimally allocate scarce resources. What does that mean in simple English? If you got $10 and that's all you got to figure out where's $3 going to go, where's $3 going to go, and where's the remaining $4 going to go. And sometimes you got to make tough choices. And the tough choices that we made in the last couple of years was to make sure that our women's program and our men's program have what they need to get the best performance possible on the field. Now, what was the cost of doing that? The cost of doing that was that we didn't have enough funds left over to provide enough budget to our U20s who were in Honduras on the men's side, and on the women's side, our U17s and our U15s. So that is the reality of the situation. So how do you solve this problem? Well, quite simply, you have two choices. Number one, the $10 can't be $10 anymore. You got to make the $10 $15. right? Because you need to make the same investment that you've done on the first team for the women and the men, and then still have a couple bucks left over to fund for camps on the youth side, right? And the second thing you need to do is be more efficient with the money that you spend. Make sure that when you spend $1, it goes as far as possible. And we're doing that as well on the men's side. You know, we have our MLS clubs who have kindly financed much of the training camps for our youth tournament. So when the U15s or the U17s, before they get together for tournaments, you know, we will have a camp at the facilities of Montreal or at the facilities of Toronto FC or in Vancouver, because we can't afford the extra money to bring a camp of players, 30 players from all across the country to one centralized location. So there's really the two ways that I see us moving forward. First of all, the $10 has got to become 15. We have to get more money. It goes back to this idea of being a $20 million organization. I do not want us to be a $20 million organization anymore. I want us to be a $50 million organization in the next 5 years and a $100 million organization in the next 10 years. We have to think big. We have to think boldly, because if we don't solve that problem, I mean, guys, you're all coaches on this Zoom call. Do you know that we have 1 million registered players in this country, and that each registered player pays a little bit of money that goes to Canada Soccer? It's about $9. So it's about $9 million. So think about it. If we're a $20 million organization, $9 million of it comes from players themselves. Do you know that we are one of the only federations in the world that actually does that, that actually still collects money from youth players to help finance what it does on the national team side? So there's a lot of work to be done. This is not something that's going to change in the short term. It's going to be something that's going to require some innovative thinking. It's going to require us to be very, very smart commercially in terms of being able to attract eyeballs when it comes to broadcasters and sponsors. And guys, look, everybody on this call loves soccer. I live it, breathe it 24/7. That's all I do. But go outside this door and outside this window, and you're still dealing with a population that would rather watch, no offense, curling on a Friday night on TSN or baseball on Sportsnet on a Monday night. We still have a massive challenge, because we've got to take our sport and transcend it beyond the people that love it to the rest of the population in this country, especially when it comes to the broadcasters. Because the problem with broadcasting as it comes to soccer is everybody freaks out about soccer every 4 years. And that's it. And then once the 4 years are up, they go back to the Raptors and the Leafs and the Blue Jays and everybody else. So we got lots of competition. What will help is performance on the field. That's what helps. So Christine St. Clair and Atiba Hutchison, they've done their job. Christine helped bring us a gold medal on the Olympic side, on the women's side, and Atiba will do everything in his power to bring us the best experience possible in Doha. What we got to do at Canada Soccer is leverage that performance on the field so that we can transcend and sell to the broadcasters that this is something that should be beyond just what you watch every 4 years. You know, I love it when the Euros are on in Toronto. You put your Greek flag on your car, your Italy flag, your Serbian flag, your Croatian flag. It's wonderful. That's what makes Canada the best country on the damn planet. But what we got to do now is we got to start putting Canadian flags on the side of the car, right? So I encourage everybody to go to Shoppers Drug Mart and Sport Check, because they've all received tons of new inventory all across Canada with flags and scarves and hats and all that kind of stuff, so that we as soccer people can overemphasize how much we love this sport, so that people that aren't soccer people can see and say, what the hell's going on? Why is my neighbor got 4 Canadian flags on his car and a scarf? And why is he going crazy in the middle of the day? Oh, it's because he's watching the World Cup, right? But that's the market that we have to tap into.
And Nick, you know, you make a good point. You have to raise money. You have to make money for the association. Marketing and sponsorship are huge.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a question. Is the Canadian Soccer Association going to take ownership for marketing and sponsorship?
So I can tell you that Canada Soccer has a professional partner whose responsibility is to bring those funds into the organization. And they will do that for us. They will continue to do that for us. We also can do more things as we approach 2026 in terms of other opportunities for revenue generating opportunities. There's philanthropic opportunities. There's galas. If you recall back many moons ago with the Olympics, do you remember when they sold those little red mittens for $10? You know that those red mittens brought in millions of dollars of revenue for the Canadian Olympic Committee. So these are the types of things that we will continue to do as we build capacity, right? I want you to think about the organization being as small as it is, with maybe 20 or 30 full-time employees who are working their butts off left, right, and center. That's not good enough. We have to be a larger, more professional organization, and little by little, we're going to bring in the expertise and the professional individuals that will help on the communication side, on the marketing side, and on the sponsorship side. I'll tell you something else that I'm looking forward to over the next 4 years, Tony, and that is exhibition matches in Canada that we can sell tickets to, because those dollars go into our pocket. Okay. Now, everybody knows I'm gonna talk about the big elephant in the room. Okay. We had an exhibition match against Panama in June. 40,000 fans showed up for that game. The players, as is their right, refused to play that game. That hurt our organization in a significant way, because a couple $1 million was not going to come into that organization right now. We're not an organization that can afford to make those types of mistakes, but the players have the right to communicate and deliver a message to the administration, as they did that day, which we heard loud and clear. And now it's our responsibility to collaborate together to make sure that doesn't happen again. But I can tell you, leading up to 2026, we will not have to compete, although it hasn't been officially announced yet. So I don't want to say something I'm not supposed to say. We will not have to potentially officially qualify for 2026. Let me put it that way. And because we don't have to officially qualify in CONCACAF, that means that we can pick and choose the teams around the world that we can host in this country. And every time we have a game, I want to sell it out, because that's the ticket revenue that's going to go back into Canada Soccer, which will eventually go back into the players' pockets, right? Because now we're not going to be a 20 million organization. We'll be a $40 million organization. And that's a good thing. So we will have more exhibition matches here in Canada in the next 4 years leading up to the 2026 World Cup, because we don't have to qualify. If we don't have COVID, as an example, and we can sell out a stadium more than 50% capacity, which, as you know, was a problem for some of our matches leading up to this cycle. So those are the things that I cannot control. I cannot control a new virus bug that might come out. I cannot control geopolitical instability in case there's a war in the Middle East or in North Korea or anywhere else in the world that something might happen. I can't control what's going to happen with the U.S. election. I know what happened last night in the U.S., which is kind of scary about what might happen with an election 2 years from now, and what that would mean, knowing that the U.S. is a partner of ours in hosting 2026. So there's a lot of moving balls. It's not a simple situation at all.
Nick, but if Canada Soccer takes ownership of sponsorship and marketing, then whatever money you get out of that, you keep.
Yeah.
But right now, you're not getting a lot of money from sponsorship, because the company that
so let me explain this, because there's so much misinformation out there. Okay, we do get a lot of money. Actually, we have a guaranteed payment that we get from this organization. And you can think it's that amount, but it's not necessarily that amount, because that amount grows and grows and grows. There's also an opportunity to grow the agreement, because when the agreement was first designed, there were certain categories in the agreement that were not permitted legislatively in Canada. So, for example, gambling was not permitted, hard liquor was not permitted. But I mean, let's be honest, if you look at gambling and hard liquor, those are probably some of the biggest sponsors in the Premiership in England or in Germany, right? So we believe that there's a tremendous amount of commercial upside if we open up those two categories, both for Canada Soccer and our partners, to help build revenue in the organization. But Tony, let's understand something. Let's use your number, 3 million, okay? We still take in 9 million just from little players, little Tommy, little Johnny, and little Maria, who play at Oakville, Vaughan, and Markham, right? So the 3 million in the grand scheme of things is not as big as the 9 million that we get just from player registration fees, given the overall context of 20. And let me also say, when we actually host a match, right? Like we did with Panama, for example, in June, 30,000, 35, 40,000 people showed up. That's about a $2 million revenue haul right there. Right. And we lost that money. We lost that opportunity. That one game. And I'm not blaming anybody. Again, I stressed quite clearly that players have the right to express themselves in a democratic society, in a democratic way. And that's how they decided to communicate the fact that they were upset with the organization and the administration. But there is another example of how you miss one game of revenue, that equals the whole cumulative pot of sponsorship. There are other opportunities as well. What we have to get our handle around is that it's not just one thing. It's not just sponsorship or registration. It's also broadcasting, and we are not doing as good a job on the broadcasting front. I'm here to tell you right now that broadcasters, and I'm talking about the big players, you know who the big players are. I'm not going to mention them by name. Normally, they provide money to a federation for the rights to show that league. Do you know that they've never compensated us for that? Never. When we used to have our games on those broadcasters, we, as Canada Soccer, had to pay them to actually put the games on TV. But that's where we are as a sport in this country. So we need to understand that we have to grow the sport, and we will do so with great performances on the field and an increase of capacity of administration off the field.
And we all know that you will, Nick. We all know that you will.
Listen,
we're gonna have.
I'm not going to quit if that's what anybody is asking. Although many people out there are not saying very kind things about me. But let me defend myself for 1 second. I am a volunteer. Let's start with that, because people don't even understand that part. I have a real job, as you can see behind you. My job is to publish research, publish books, teach the young and the future generation of business people, in this country. But I believe that I am the right man for the job, because I have the soccer passion in me as a player, as a coach, as an administrator, as a volunteer. But I also believe I have the business acumen that you need as a strategist to think long term. And the other thing that I think I have, which is very, very important as a president, is I have an eye for talent. I know who I need to put in certain key positions, like a Bev, like a John, like an Earl Cochran as our general secretary, and others moving forward, because those are the people that actually run Canada Soccer. I'm going to be honest with you. Okay, as a volunteer and a chair of a board, our job is up here at the 50,000 foot level. We don't deal with the operational issues, as you know, on a day-to-day basis, Tony, with marketing and communications and so forth. But we've got to make sure that we put the right people in place and give them the tools that they need to extract the value that we all believe. There is untapped potential. My God, I am not any different than anybody else on this call. When we saw the Honduras game a couple of generations ago, when we lost 8-1, and I'm like, and as a fan, I was crying, I was upset, and it really was the inciting action for me. I was like, I got to do something. I got to help out somehow. So I am no different than many of you out there that are complaining about what's happening with Canada Soccer and the mistakes that we have made. I also want to make a difference, but I encourage all of you to do so as well. Please keep on coaching, keep on volunteering with your local clubs. It's the truth. It's about Canada. We are a volunteer industry right now. We are. If you look at anybody who's involved with soccer in this country, there's about 2.5 to 3 million people involved as 99% of them are volunteers. 99%. There's not a lot of people in this country who actually get paid because they have a soccer position, as a therapist, as a coach, as a player. It's a very, very small number. We've got to make that percentage much larger, like it is in a very, very sophisticated and mature soccer market like Germany and Italy and the UK and what have you. And that's really our job, is to do that, is to grow that sport.
Yeah, but Nick, when you are in the position that you are, you expose yourself to criticism. And people, unfortunately, they only remember, say, the bad things, right? When you do something good, well, somebody else did it. When
that's okay.
Something bad happens, it's your fault.
That's okay. And this is the great thing about being a president that's a volunteer. You get elected. And if the people who elect me don't want me anymore, guess what? Just like in a US election or a Canadian election, I will go back to happily doing my real job and focusing on my wife and my 3 children and cheering on my kids. I will never, ever lose the passion Nick, that I have for this sport.
We don't want to do that. Since you've been president, we won a gold medal. We're going to the World Cup with both teams. So no, we want you to stay there.
You know what? I want that too. But what I want is I want the relationship to be more cohesive. My biggest regret is, as I mentioned earlier, I started as president during COVID. I didn't really have the time to interact, physically, face-to-face, and socialize with our staff, with our provincial bodies, with the players on the men's and the national team. I spent many, many years early on in my career with the women's national team, traveling with them, and I got to know them a little bit better. I've never been traveling with the men's team at all. Like, given the COVID situation that we've had, that's transpired in the last year. So I think it's important, first and foremost, because when you develop those deep relationships, then you're not just some figure. You're not just some president sitting somewhere making $1 million a year wearing fancy suits, which is the prevailing image that people have. No, you're just a guy. You're a regular guy who loves the sport, who has a little bit of expertise that he's trying to bring to the table, who was just as upset as you were when we lost 8-1, who now wants to make a difference for the future generation, moving forward. And that's what I want to do. I want to, and I'm hoping that when I travel to Qatar, I will be going to Qatar to meet the players, obviously, once they start the campaign, that I do have an opportunity as head of delegation to really meet with them, to sit down with them. Some of the players I know well, because obviously I had a strong relationship through my children at Toronto FC. So I know some of the TFC players, but most of the players I don't have a relationship with. And that's a regretful thing. I want to have a relationship with them, not only with the men, but with the women as well. But at the same time, it's very important as president that I maintain, what's it called? Not a wall, but you understand, a formal distance, because, I can't be their friend. That's not my position. My position is to be the president. My job is to make sure that I sustain the long-term viability of this association. That's my job as president. It's not my job to be the biggest fan of the men's national team or the women's national team, because guess what? We have more than just those two kids. Yes, we have a really big sister and a really, really big brother, and the sisterhood and the brotherhood are doing awesome. But I have many, many children. I have a U20 team, a U17, a U15. I have coaches that need licensing and courses. I have referees that need to be standardized. I have curriculum that needs to be developed. There's many, many things that Canada Soccer does, right? So it's a very large, complex organization. But yes, make no mistake. How the men perform on the field and how the women perform on the field dictates and trickles down to everything else.
Nick,
go ahead, Alf. Go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say thank you for your time so far. I was just wondering whether we could take a few more minutes of your time, or if you have a pressing engagement.
I want to keep on
You're
going.
on a
I
roll,
just get
Nick.
warmed up.
Well, then fantastic. We want to keep you because we do have questions coming in from our viewers. And I do have an interesting question here from Jamie Shannon, who, if you don't mind, Nick, I'd like to give you his question. It's kind of a two-part question, but he says, with the money our federation will see from the next 2 World Cups and hopefully going forward, where do you see the investment going? And he makes a couple of suggestions in terms of creation of regional training centers, which is something that you mentioned previously in terms of what is lacking within the infrastructure, or investments in domestic leagues. How do you see that money eventually being allocated?
Sure. So there are also parts of Canada Soccer that have received very, very limited funding. And what I'm talking specifically about here is futsal, para, and beach soccer, which are all sanctioned soccers within the FIFA family. Even though we have those teams, I can't say that I'm proud of the activity and the programming that they've received. So I would want to, revitalize those programs. I think it's very, very important to revitalize those programs. Having said that, if you were to look at all the things that I've spoken about, a women's professional league is a #1 priority. So more so than I think what we have with our MLS infrastructure and our current CPL infrastructure. That, to me, is the #1 priority. Any excess funds that we will have coming out of the World Cups will go towards strengthening and stabilizing a women's professional league. That's important. But let me again reiterate and remind everybody, we're not going to launch the league, and we're not going to fund the clubs in the league, right? Investors do that. What we can do is solidify the infrastructure surrounding a league. Every league needs referees. Every league needs sanctioning and standards and facilities even, right? That's what we will do as part of Canada Soccer. Now, what do I want to have our partners do? I think, and let me also ask, is Jamie Shannon the same Jamie Shannon that played for Hamilton Serbians against me when I used to play for Dundas United? Because if he is, I haven't spoken to him in a long time. I hope it is. Anyway, let's talk about the CPL as an example. The CPL needs expansion, 100%, right? Now, we're going to grow with Vancouver FC, but let's be transparent and honest. Some of the clubs have not been as successful as we would like them to be. So we need to strengthen all the clubs so that even, some of the clubs that we would deem to be the top tier clubs, that delta between the top tier clubs and the clubs that are a little bit lower, that delta needs to shrink so that all of our clubs are healthy. We also need to make sure that Atletico Ottawa is very, 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 very happy. Now, why am I focusing on Atletico Ottawa? I'll tell you why. One of the last things that I did as a formal role as a member of the board of directors of Canada Soccer was, I think the date was March 7th or 8th, I'm trying to remember, 2020. And that was in Ottawa, where we formally welcomed Atletico Madrid as a brand new investor in the CPL. What an amazing event that was. Think about who Atletico Madrid is in the pantheon of clubs around the world. They are legit. They are a big kahuna. And here they are coming to our little country, to our little league that was, only a couple of years old at the time, and say, we believe in you. We're going to invest in you. And now we're going to have a club. And Alf, guess what? They made it to the final, right? 10 days ago. What an amazing story and how quickly they did it. Now, why am I telling you that's important? Because at the same time that March the 7th or 8th, 2020 occurred, guess what happened 10 days later? Boom, COVID, pandemic. We were locked down. And when we were locked down, and let's be honest, we've been locked down for about a year and a half at least. Some people say it was 2 years. All these other clubs around the world that were watching, because people watch what Atletico Madrid does, right? Real watches, Barcelona watches, Bayern, Olympiacos, Manchester United, Chelsea, they all watch. So as we were now opening the curtain to say, hey, here we are, CPL, come on in, that curtain got shut down because of the pandemic. What I want now to occur is for Atletico Madrid to be very happy, which they are because they did really, really well this season, to go back now and tell their colleagues, and all the conversations that I've had, even with the chairman of Atletico Madrid back in Madrid, Spain, they are extremely happy with the CPL and what we've done so far. And they are telling their contacts to also consider CPL investment. People wonder, what does a president do? That's what I'll be doing in Qatar all day, every day, in meetings, trying to sell Canada to the rest of the world. That's what my job is as president. So I'll be doing it not only for the CPL, but guess what else the chairman of Atletico Madrid wants? And he keeps on asking me every time. He's like, Nick, when is the Women's Professional League ready? We're coming. So that's an amazing thing as well, right? To know that we will have potential international partners to help facilitate some of our domestic partners. I mentioned the MLS clubs and some of the top CPL clubs, and maybe some of the community clubs that will also provide us with the infrastructure for what a women's professional league will be. So to answer your question, yes, futsal, very important. Para, very important. Beach, very important, because we haven't really done a lot of activity with the limited funds and those. Making sure that we continue to invest in the momentum for women's professional soccer. And then our youth teams, right? I am also extremely upset when our U15s or our U17s show up at a CONCACAF event 24 hours before the first game and say, hey, my name's Nick. What's your name? Oh, your name is Roger. Oh, I play in Toronto. Where do you play? Oh, I play in Montreal. Some of our players are meeting each other for the first time. 24 hours or 48 hours before a high-profile tournament like CONCACAF and FIFA. So it's no wonder that some of you are upset at our performance, because we think we may have some of the great players from a technical perspective, from an athletic perspective. And okay, make no mistake, being that you're all coaches on the call, I know everybody's got feedback when it comes to talent identification, because everybody thinks they're an expert in talent identification. I don't even have that conversation. It's not part of my expertise. I'll let the technical people, John and Bev, deal with that. But what I can tell you is we need to have way more youth camps, way more youth camps. There's no way a U15 or a U17 team should be going to a CONCACAF tournament having never played together. If you look at our friends down south in the US, their youth teams meet 3, 4, 6 times. They have camps before they go to their first CONCACAF tournament together. And that's why the continuity of being able to play together as a team, in my opinion, at that age is even more important than the talent ID piece, right? Because the truth about talent ID is everybody has a different trajectory of talent development, right? We have players on the national team who were on the U15 and 17 team, Samuel Piet and others. And then we have players on the national team who were never identified for any of our youth national teams, who came to their own later on in their careers. And that's just soccer. That's the way it works. But what should never happen again? So the question, of course, from Jamie is, where should the money be going? That's where the money should be going as well. So yeah, we're making a decision now to invest in the first team, our women's and our men's program, because we believe the trickle down will be there. I mean, hey, if the men get out of the group in Doha, Qatar, guess what? There's even more prize money that will go to the men, to the women, and to Canada Soccer. So the better they perform, the better it is for everybody in the family.
I think we are in good hands, Nick. I think we are, we're on the right path. If you look at the success of the men and the women's team, I've had the opportunity to look at some of the younger kids, the 15, 16 at the OPDL level, where I'm scouting for the OSA. There's a lot of talent. There's a lot of good players on the boys' side and on the girls' side. We just need to find a way to take that talent and grow it and give them an opportunity to grow and to be better. And
I agree.
And I think we will.
I agree. I look at, where, and I played soccer, obviously, in Scarborough growing up, as I mentioned before. And, the clubs that I played with, Azuri and Scarborough Maple Leaf, we had a lot of successes, Ontario championships, Canadian championships, the Robbie, all of that. But when I compare how I played at 16 with how some of the kids who are 16 years old play today, it's night and day. I mean, the access that they have to professional coaches. I mean, okay, I didn't have a professional coach. I had a dad who put his hand up and said, I'll drive the kids to the field. That's what I had, right? But you look at some of the coaching that we have today, and that's why I love that we have standards-based leagues. And that's a Canada Soccer implementation, just like we will have clubs who will be accredited based on standards. And that's what you need. This is something that we borrowed from Iceland. People, if you recall, when Iceland made their big foray, people wondered, well, what was the secret to Iceland? Well, the secret was the amount of coaches that had professional licenses in Iceland. So we brought that in, obviously, with standard-based leagues for the OPDL and in Quebec and BC and other provinces across this country. But if you're a coach and you're on this Zoom call right now and you have a kid, and you think that kid has what it takes, I'm here to tell you, don't stop. Don't take no for an answer. You contact your district, you contact your provincial association, you contact our NEX or our REX representative from Canada Soccer, and that first person says no, so what? So what? One person said no. Is there somebody out there that perhaps I don't know about who is the god of talent ID, right? If you think as a coach, you have somebody who has what it takes, it behooves you as the coach to keep on fighting, find the right person that will take a look at that kid, because the kid deserves to have that chance to be looked at.
Agree. Totally. All right.
100%.
It's been interesting, to say the least, Nick. We have to do these again another time. Hopefully,
well,
when
guess
you come
what?
back.
I'll come back and see you guys.
Qatar.
Yeah, I'll come back and see you guys after we raise some eyebrows and some eyeballs in Doha, because that's what I'm hoping for. I know John has come out and provided some communication with regards to his expectations. Those are my expectations too at Canada Soccer. I mean, okay, I used to play soccer. I still play old timers, but I cannot kick the ball for anybody in Doha. That's not my job. We have other players whose job it is to execute. Now, I'm quite upset and disappointed that, we've had some bad news in the last few days, right? We had Kennedy with the shoulder displacement. We had Fonzie with the tear or the strain of the hammy. And then we had Crépeau with the tib-fib fracture. I just want you to all know that I've suffered from all three of those injuries. Shoulder out, tib-fib fracture, and obviously being a striker, the amount of hammies I pulled in my time, my Lord. So we all wish everybody 100% the fastest and most healthy recovery possible, specifically when it comes to Kennedy, which is disappointing, and also Max Crépeau, which is disappointing because they won't have enough time to recover. But Fonzie, if you're hearing this, Fonzie, my God, I'm going to be praying for your son. I know hammies are very, very sensitive muscles, especially when you are a world-class sprinter like Fonzie is. That's what he uses to turn the corner on guys, make them look like pylons. But at the same time, the medical experts, they're the ones that are going to decide when Fonzie is going to come back. Because the one thing that we do know about hammies, having pulled many myself, you can't come back too early from a hammy, because if the hammy's not ready, the pull then becomes a strain, and the strain then becomes a rip, right? And we don't want that for Fonzie, but we definitely appreciate how much of an impact. And I know this because I have obviously my contacts in Doha and Qatar already. Fonzie, this is his World Cup. He will blow up in this World Cup. There are fans from all over the world already in Doha that are waiting for Fonzie to arrive. So he is our superhero. And I hope, God willing, that he will be healthy enough to recover in time so that he can play. And I know it's a dream of his to play as well.
Great. Listen, thanks very much. I'm not so sure that we're going to get cut off usually after an hour and a half. I appreciate you staying on, Nick, and maybe we could keep trying a little longer if you have.
Well, if we get cut off, let me say thank you first and foremost ahead of time. So I want to thank obviously everybody, the organizers. Thank you, Alf. You and I have done a couple of interviews now. It is always a pleasure. You are a gentleman, Alf, and you are a pioneer, man. You were doing things for this sport when we were all just chumps at the time. So credit goes to you, Alf, for the fact that you're still plugging away. I know you're doing your work for the CPL, and obviously I hope that you will continue to do the work for the CPL. And I wait for the day, Alf, that you also do play-by-play and reporting for our first women's professional match.
I'd love to do that. I'd absolutely love to do that, Nick. Thank you so much. Thanks very much for your transparency and your honesty through this entire webinar. It's appreciated, I'm sure, and it was certainly a privilege for me. I'm going to have to log off, John, just to attend to some personal business. But thanks so much again, Nick, and thanks to all the viewers and the NSCAC members who joined us this afternoon. It was really interesting and really exciting.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
See you guys next time. All the best. Thank you. Take
Thanks,
care.
guys.
Good luck in Qatar.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck.